Yes, and now I see that Olena Zaytseva is ready to present her report because it is time, and we are sorry if there is discrepancy between time in where you now and in Germany. Olena Zaytseva is a lawyer and researcher of international law on combating sexual exploitation, and a lot of events she prepared, and 10 years she worked at the international commercial law and due diligence to more than 10 years. Since 2015, her professional focus had been women's rights, and till today. It is very important for today that on February 24th, Olena joined a team of CURGE on combating trafficking in human beings and gender-based violence. Olena is a postgraduate student of Koretsky Institute of State of Law of National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine. And she is very, very interesting and blogger who gave a lot of very important information. I follow you with great attention, and thank you, and we are ready to hear your report. Please.
Thank you so much, and especially for the emphasizing Ukrainian women's voices in these times, and especially women scientists. You don't hear at all?
Yes, now we hear.
Okay, so I would like to thank you, the organizers, for this event, because it's very important to emphasize Ukrainian women's voices, and especially women scientists in the situation of war. In my presentation, I would like to raise the topic of war and peace in the context of self-realization of women and women's rights and safety. As my research interests include combating human trafficking and sexual exploitation, as was already mentioned. So this presentation will also include these issues. Personally, for me, the war created a possibility to strengthen my scientific research through really practical work in this topic and establishing closer contacts with human rights organizations, with experts, with scientists from different countries, with establishing those contacts important to understanding the difference of situation during war and during peaceful times, and especially as related to risks of human trafficking, sexual exploitation, gender-based violence. My previous work was related to integration gender equality perspective into state policies, state programs through results-based management. But now, because of this war, my work has changed. And as was mentioned, my organization immediately responded to Russia's aggression against Ukraine and focused on helping vulnerable groups and the army. And of course, one of such vulnerable groups are refugee women and girls. And one of the greatest risks for them is, unfortunately, sexual exploitation and human trafficking for other purposes, including in the European Union. And this fact is actually confirmed by the European Parliament's resolution of 5th May 2022 on the impact of the war against Ukraine on women. As a lawyer, I see how the legislation affects the situation of gender equality, but the impact of so-called traditional values or gender stereotypes is also obvious. And this topic is very closely related to the war of Russia, because in this war, we fight for our democratic values and human rights, as opposed to tyranny, censorship, ban on public gathering, devaluation of women's rights, in fact, even normalization of violence against women, so widespread in the Russian Federation. And this is exactly the case when, according to traditional values, Violence and prejudice is hidden behind traditions. When women discrimination norms are hidden behind what is called culture, and for instance, Russian culture. In my presentation, I would like to, first of all, list those aspects of gender stereotypes that affect rights and security of women in Ukraine now on the territory of Ukraine, and then those who are more relevant to Ukrainian refugee women abroad. And there are quite a lot of them. Of course, I will not be able to consider all, but I will show several situations in more details. And finally, I will provide some suggestions, what can be done now or in the long term. And at once, I would like to note that these observations usually need further study. Also, some of them are confirmed by previous research, both in Ukraine and abroad. So I'll start sharing my screen. Hope you see it. So what is the specifics on the territory of Ukraine which may affect women's rights and safety, and which are mostly related to so-called gender stereotypes? First of all, that the women's rights are usually considered secondary during the war. We all understand that the dangers and this being scared for your life, for your safety, for your relatives, makes you think that some equality issues are secondary. High level of victim blaming among Ukrainians is also very widespread. It's not only about society, it's about state institutions, about police, about the courts. It's also influences of what we have with women's rights issues and safety. There is also a prevailing traditional vision of the role of women as caregivers. So women should go and take care of the relatives, old ones, children, of their houses. And this influences of how they are seen during the war, of how their work during the war is evaluated. I see, and I know that most of the researchers of you see the low levels of trust of Ukrainians in law enforcement agencies, including the police. And the problem is that the gender-based violence, which is rather new concept for Ukraine, I would say, and practice, not many people do understand what gender violence is. And mostly people understand it is something related to use of physical force or threat of force. We also have invisibility of women's contribution to the protection and support of Ukraine. And I will stop on this later. We have normalization of sexual harassment and discrimination against women, including in the armed forces and paramilitary unions. And we do have domestic violence increase and lower chances to counter it during the war, which was already confirmed in previous years also. What is the specifics as related to Ukrainian refugees, which may affect women's rights? It's a huge number of refugees in a short time, about 5 million. It's unprecedented amount of people moving. And that women and children represent 90% of the refugees. As I know before, many times when refugees came into European Union, for example, there were a very big amount of men. And now the situation is very different, which puts those women and children who come from Ukraine to additional risks. And most of these refugees from Ukraine are first time abroad. Most of them don't know local language, and they do not have access to services in Ukrainian language, even on line 112, which we recommend to call in case of emergencies. We do have war-related trauma of Ukrainian refugees. All of them do have it. And we do have difficult financial situation, poverty, and the situation when many do not have necessary things or necessary amount of money. Many refugees are lacking all those things. And we do have very high risk of trafficking, as I already mentioned, especially in some European countries. And we do have understanding of trafficking as also related to use of force, as threat of force, as I mentioned before, related to gender-based violence. It's the same situation here. Violence and trafficking are mostly regarded as something as related to use of force. And I will stop on this issue again later. So let's consider one situation in more detail. When we have a high level of victim blame, what possible consequences we will have? We will have the situation when the victim is not supported by her relatives or close people. She will not feel support from real neighbors. She will not feel that society is on her side. And witnesses will rarely take an active position and report the situation to the police. For example, in Ukraine, just recently, I've heard about the situation when a woman called the police in situation when she heard that there is a domestic violence near to her home, near to her flat. And the police told her that you may face a fine next time because it's not your task as a witness to call us. The victim should call us. It's not your problem. Of course, doesn't happen every time, but this is a real situation that is just an example of how the system makes women silent. And of course, this accusation will reduce the likelihood of victims to turn to the police. What the results of low level of trust in law enforcement agencies? This is again that the women will avoid seeking help from the police or other authorities. Women will waste time consulting with their friends, just writing to the social media in some closed group and will not receive qualified response. They will waste time and lose the opportunity to prove the existence of the crime. We know that during war, there are not so much requirements to prove as in a peaceful situation. However, in Europe, people from Ukraine who do not trust the police will waste their time. Instead of going directly to the police, they will do any other actions. And I already witnessed this situation when my friends from Europe witnessing the crime were consulting me, what should we do? Maybe we should go to the place where the violation is done and do some investigation. And I asked her, why do you just don't call the police? They are telling me that they do not believe that they will receive some help. And this hiding information will also result in the police not being able to investigate the case properly. And this is a case of invisibility of women's contribution to the protection and support in Ukraine. What possible consequences there will be? Of course, there are much more possible consequences than I show, but this is the thing the cases to think about. First of all, any choice of women criticized. Whenever she wants to join the army, she will be a bad mother because she wants to leave her children. In other case, if she chose to take children abroad to defend them from the risks, she's called useless, she's called a runner, she's called somebody who doesn't care about her country, who doesn't want to help her country. When the women get to the defense unit or to the army, they are always at risk of discrimination. And I also read it every day, almost every day, from my friends who are describing the cases of real discrimination in the army of women today. This is harassment, this is stereotypically female task, this is jokes and laughs and devaluating women's involvement and women's value in the army. And as a result, women are not seen as the defenders. Everybody seems to forget that 30% of the military forces of the Ukrainian army are women, and about 16-70%, this is the data before the war, were actually combatants. But everybody sees the army as men, talks about men rescues, help men think about men defenders. This is reinforcement of traditional secondary role of women as defenders or as active people, active in social life. And we will definitely have exclusion of women from decision. We do already have it, the exclusion of women from decision-making processes, both during the war and when we have the post-war reconstruction. And another important issue is violence and trafficking, when people do not understand that cases of pressure, manipulation, use of vulnerability is also a crime. So whenever anybody offers a Ukrainian refugee any type of work related to sexual exploitation, and I know that in some countries of Europe, for example, sex industry is legalized. This, according to the law, this should be described as using of vulnerability, and this is what international law says. But it will not be like this on practice, I'm most sure, because it's so hard to understand when is this vulnerability starts and when the pressure goes, when the pressure becomes changes this consent into not a true consent, I would say, when consent is formal. So many people think that when they give any formal consent, this is not a crime. And of course, cases of sexual exploitation will not be reported when a person gives even this formal consent under pressure, under deception, feeling that she has a debt to somebody, even when the debt is created not in a real situation, when the debt is formal, when people make her think that she has a debt. In all those cases, we will not see the cases of exploitation because people will not address for help, not to police, no to NGOs, no to any state authorities. We will not see those crimes, they will remain hidden. What is being done in Ukraine, and of course this is just a little part which I am related to, because, and this is why I know it. Yes, some officials do mention women defenders, women in their speech, in their articles, and we see sometimes and we understand that the women are really defending the country, that they are in the army, but this is not very widespread. The issue of trafficking is being highlighted now everywhere. There is a website, safewomen.com.ua, there are SMS about the risk, there are printed leaflets, online information distributed as to Ukrainians, as abroad to Ukrainian refugees. And the women's organizations are organizing and offering services which state cannot give so quickly in this amount. For example, to legal and psychological assistance to victims of rape and other types of violence or discrimination against women. And there are educational events on women's rights and safety. This is what I see. Of course, there are many other actions being done, and we will see them in the nearest future. And what can be done with the help of European Union, with the help of international educational organizations. We should highlight the participation of women in the defense of Ukraine, as well as volunteering and in supporting the economy, and underline how important this role is in peace building for the country in general. And we should inform and encourage victims and witnesses to take an active position and report crimes, including sexual exploitation crimes, to understand where the crime starts. And we should initiate research, and this maybe is more related to scientific community, research to show how women and men, what role do they have in peace and security situations, and always include data disaggregation in our research. And we should draw attention to and properly investigate cases of harassment, violence, and exploitation of women. And in the long run, I do really hope that we will receive support and the full involvement of women in decision-making in peace and security, as well as post-war reconstruction of the country. And in some cases, our foreign partners can help us with it, making it as an issue of, as a question of balanced participation of women when they offering help to Ukraine. And I hope that best practices in combating trafficking and sexual exploitation, and I mean fighting demand, will be implemented in all European countries and in Ukraine. And I do think that we really need to establish help centers, safe houses for victims of gender-based violence and all types of trafficking in Ukraine and in those European countries that do not have such organizations, centers. Thank you. This is all from my part, and I'll be happy to answer the questions if you do have any.
Thank you so much for so interesting and deep and very important for contemporary situation, topical situation problem. Thank you so much. And I